Friends, pray with me our centering prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, may your will be done through me. And you may be seated. Every year when I wear my black boots out in the snow and the salt and I watch them dry, there is this line of salt, a salt stain, that appears on my boots. It's really kind of ugly. And for years and years I'd go and I'd get a washcloth and I'd soak it in water and I'd go and I'd scrub at that salt line, salt stain on my boots, and it would disappear immediately because, the boot was wet. Only to come back again when the boot dried. Didn't really matter because I had to go back outside in the salt and snow again. This went on about 40 years. And then this 12-year-old comes into my life, my daughter, who I noticed one day wiping the salt stain from her boots, and she's using a baby wipe. I said, "What are you doing?" She says, "Well, I saw this on social media. It's supposed to get rid of the stain." Well, like you, I give social media a rather low credibility rating. I also, of course, the advice of a 12-year-old. But nonetheless, took me some time, got over myself, over my preoccupations, my doubts, to get humble, get curious, pulled out the baby wipe. It works. A lot better than a washcloth. And it makes me wonder what preoccupations and doubts I have about other things. How I need to get curious and humble about other things. Wondering about you. I'm wondering what preconceptions and doubts you brought into church today. How God may be calling you to be more humble and curious. Because, of course, today we're in Lent. Lent is all about change. We embrace the disciplines of fasting, Bible reading, almsgiving, prayer, so that when we celebrate Christ's resurrection in a couple of weeks, we're changed for the better. Maybe you're like me. You want to be calmer, less anxious, more forgiving, kinder, more willing to help other people. Lent wants to call these things out of us. Our society is not made better except when the individuals are made better. That's what God means when we pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." So that's who I want to be. Somebody kinder, gentler, less anxious, more forgiving, more generous, more thoughtful of other people, more accepting of way 12-year-old advice. I want to be all I can be, who is somebody more in touch with themselves. I wonder how that resonates with you. Be more in touch with yourself and those all around you, more committed in helping heal the world around us. Well, to do this, we meet a couple of fellow travelers this morning. We meet Abraham and we meet Peter, who wrestled with their own angels and demons, just as you and I do. And we find that their stories intersect with what you and I brought into church this morning, our doubts, our pain, our unbelief, but also our belief, our faithfulness, and the ways that you have been a good partner to God. Always so quick to jump on our own cases when we miss it. But folks, let me be one of the ones who commends you for the times that you've made it. By virtue of the fact that you are in this building or you are tuned in online, you're a person of faith. You have faith, at least the size of a mustard seed, which means that there's a part of you that suspects that God is doing something in you and with you and for you and through you. And like Abraham and Peter, we're far from 100% faithful in all that we say or that we do, knowing that our faithfulness falls way short of God's faithfulness. And like Abraham and like Peter, God is determined to do something in you and with you and for you and through you. I think a big question we ask today is, can we believe it? Can we believe it? Well, let's start out with Abraham. He's the founder of all three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, in that order. He was a descendant of Noah through his son Shem, and the first person in the Bible to be called a Hebrew. All Jews trace their heritage to Abraham. Isaiah 51 says, "Look to the rock from whom you were cut, your father Abraham." In the Christian scriptures, we heard it today, St. Paul teaches that all Christians find their spiritual origins in Abraham, not just in today's text, but also in Galatians 3, where St. Paul writes, "If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed." So what was so important about Abraham? What the heck did this guy do? One thing. He believed. Abraham believed. And he believed like you and me. Some of the time. Not all the time. He made some great marks in faith and in belief. But he also made some huge gaffes. He believed God when he was told to leave his hometown of Ur. And God said, "You're going to go to a better place." Packed up his family and he went. He believed God when he was told to take his only son Isaac to that holy mount for a sacrifice. It's interesting, after that story, Abraham's wife never talked to him again. No more camping with Dad. He believed that even though 99 years old, he'd have a baby. However, this wonderful faithfulness, as I say, is only half the story. Henry Ford had great successes, wonder kind of building cars. He also had a shadow side, racism and control. Flaws not unlike us, not unlike Abraham. You may remember when famine had struck the land and Abraham and Sarah were forced to flee Egypt. Abraham, so scared of what Pharaoh might do, asked his wife to call him his brother. She's just my sister. He did this not just once but twice, when later he moved to the land of the Philistines, and King Abimelech was the one to be feared. He told Sarah to lie, say, "You're my sister." And then when Abraham was frustrated because pregnancy had not come immediately to Sarah, Abraham slept with his maid, Hagar. All this makes me think of your journey and of my journey. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's always the way it is, isn't it? Ever been on a diet when you weigh yourself every week? There's that 1 week where you actually gain weight. How did that happen? How did that happen? I've been eating Triscuits. Salad leaves. But that's how life goes. It's 2 steps forward, it's 1 step back. The steps backward are the ones filled with doubt. The steps forward are the ones in which we believe. God is asking each one of us to take steps forward that draw us closer to God, closer to goodness. What's that next right step in your life? It's a step towards believing. A step towards believing God. Believing you'll be cared for. Your financial, relational, health worries don't need to sink you. That your kids, your grandkids, your biggest worries will somehow find resolution. That our nation's politics, Israel, Russia, and the plethora of world problems that keep us up at night might find their ends beyond our worry. Believing God for these things then frees you and me up for the bigger things, like that vision and that dream and that hope and that possibility that God gave you. Not to simply luxuriate in, but to grab hold of and to live into. That's why everybody here has been given that faith, that gift, to believe. That's what happened with Abraham. That's what happened with our good friend St. Peter. We heard about him in our gospel reading this morning, but not included was the first part of that famous conversation that you know well. Those of us who went on our Israel trip not too long ago remember up at Caesarea Philippi, the headwaters of the Jordan River, hearing that story when Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "Who do you say that I am?" Somebody said John the Baptist. Somebody else said, "Oh, it's Elijah the prophet." But it was Peter who spoke up and he said, "You are the Messiah." Peter gets it right. He gets an A+. He moves to the head of the class. But moments later, Jesus explains how he's going to suffer and die and rise again. Clearly, Peter didn't understand and was certainly not happy with this news, so he decides that he can object. He's not humble. He's not curious. He's judgmental. He's pompous. He's controlling. And he, the disciple, rebukes the master. And Jesus famously says, "Get behind me, Satan," which is something I know a lot of you tell the dessert waiter. Peter goes from first to worst in a matter of moments. Takes that one step back almost immediately after taking those 2 steps forward. And Peter will go on to repeat that pattern that you and I repeat. He'll be with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. He'll be in the Garden of Gethsemane. He'll walk with him to Jerusalem when he knows that peril awaits him. Faithful Peter. But then he'll famously deny him 3 times in his hour of need, flee for his own safety, be nowhere the time of the empty tomb. But then Peter will move forward again. He'll found the church in Rome, eventually be martyred for the faith. And I'm wondering how your journey looks like Peter's journey. And I'm wondering if you're in your time of denial or absence, or your time of drawing closer than you've ever been, or probably somewhere in between. And if today you might be debating about leaving the past behind in some area of your life and taking one step closer, and you're wondering, what does that look like? In a few moments, you're going to hear our choir, you're going to hear an anthem, and they're going to sing something called Order My Steps. And it's about surrendering to that urge to leave behind the past, because there's something in every area of our lives, friends, that we need to leave behind and have God take over. Order my steps. And as our music ministers lead us, you might want to think of the ways God is asking you to surrender and how God is working to order your steps. And in the meantime, now I've got a poem. I've annotated the words of one of my favorite poets, David Whyte, and I'd like to invite you to close your eyes as I read a portion of an annotated poem called True Love. There is a faith in loving fiercely, in surrendering to the voice that calls, especially if you have fallen hard and often, and part of you never believed you deserved this loved and beckoning hand held out to you this way. Years ago in the Hebrides, I remember an old man who walked every morning on the gray stones to the shore of baying seals, who would press his hat to his chest in the blustering salt wind and say his prayer to the turbulent Jesus hidden in the water. And I think of the story of the storm and everyone waking and seeing the distant yet familiar figure far across the water calling to them, and how we are all preparing for that abrupt waking and that calling and that moment when we have to say yes. Except it will not come so grandly, so biblically, but more subtly and intimately in the face of the one you know you have to love. So that when we finally step out of the boat toward them, we find everything holds us and everything confirms our courage. And if you wanted to drown, you could, but you don't. Because finally, after all this struggle and all these years, you simply don't want to anymore. You simply had enough of drowning. And you want to live, and you want to love, and you will walk across any territory and any darkness, however fluid and however dangerous, to take the one hand you know belongs